So welcome to this ACOSTE webinar. Just before we get started with the actual main event, just a little bit about ACOSTE. There are many people on this call, some of which will be members, some of which won't. So just to give you a little bit of a flavour for ACOSTE, if you don't know anything about us, we're the authority representing professional interests of those responsible for all levels with the prediction, planning and controls of resource and cost for activities. So essentially, think of us as the home of project controls. Anything that kind of touches project controls in terms of managing projects and programs, essentially that's what we specialise within and provide support for professionals within that area. So if you are fancying joining us once you've heard kind of this webinar, please do get in contact with us. This will be a part one of a part two series. And today I'm going to be talking to you around some insights that were originally presented by myself at the Major Projects Association. So part one will be presented by myself, Carolyn Browning, and I'll introduce myself fully in due course. The second part will be it's really good news that we'll be joined by Emily Brown, who's from BAE Systems, and that will occur in January 2024. So she'll be taking us on a kind of journey through how BAE addresses some of the concepts that I discuss and introduce today. Now, all of the event details will be shared in full over the forthcoming days. There's a QR code down the bottom for you to kind of scan and follow us on LinkedIn, etc. And all of the event details will be shared with everybody who has signed up to this webinar today. Just a little bit of functionality and housekeeping. This session has been recorded and will be shared with our members. So if you're not a member yet and you do want to kind of get recordings of these webinars, even the ones that you can't attend, then please consider joining us. There is a question and answer panel in the Teams console that you can access if you want to submit some questions that I will hopefully manage the time on so that we've got enough time to go through those in the Q&A at the end. Alternatively, please have them in the chat as well. I will be having a look through those right at the very end. So please feel free to put them in as we go, and we'll hopefully be able to get through as many as possible towards the end of the presentation. So final bit of housekeeping from myself is kind of dates for the diary. So there are a number of webinars coming up that may pique your interest. We have Christine McLean, our ACOSTE president, talking around unconscious bias on the 22nd of November. We have another best practice session on cost estimating and planning of construction projects, which will be a really interesting one for those involved in that on the 30th of November. In January, as I've stated, we have Emily joining us from BAE to talk around the session that she presented at the MPA as well on the case study that she took us through. And then in May, we have our kind of ACOSTE conference, which will be a fantastic two-day event around controls and skills for you, your work in the world. Ultimately, it's going to be 2 days of really interactive sessions with fantastic speakers and the ability to really take home some key learning points through quite a lot of interactive elements. So please save the dates for those. There will be more information that we announce soon. There are further webinar dates that we will be announcing, so make sure that you are following us on LinkedIn and have signed up as membership. So without further ado, today I am talking to you about the unresolved issues of estimating and forecasting. So as I've said, this was originally a presentation that I put together for the association. But we felt within ACOSTE that there was a lot of kind of transferable learning here, so we wanted to share it with a wider audience, which is what we're doing here today. So a little bit about myself. I'm a self-confessed spinner of far too many plates. I like to have a portfolio of activities to keep me busy and fulfilled. I joined the ACOSTE this year as their director and company secretary, and the association is going through a phenomenal lot of change and evolution, and I'm really excited to be a part of that. I've been involved with the APM ever since I first started out in project management and control, and have been an active volunteer over many years in many different associations. I'm a published author and as part of the team that wrote the current bestseller in the APM of All Things Project Controls, the Planning, Monitoring, Scheduling and Controls Guide. And we hope to top that with another book that I'm the co-lead author on, that's going through copy editing right now, which is going to be the major collaboration between the APM and the ACOSTE. It's going to be project controls in the 21st century, and it's going to be a pivotal piece of guidance for all professionals that will hopefully link things like the British Standard across to the National Occupation Standards for apprentices, through to examinations that you can get as a as a more experienced professional, and link all of those different aspects together. We hope that that's a comprehensive guide that will surpass the kind of success and reach of the previous and provide an invaluable tool for people. And then alongside my work with associations, I, of course, run my own small consultancy. I need to pay the bills somehow, and I focus on a blend of transformational change work, improvement initiatives within project controls, and a suite of coaching and mentoring services, which I hope to launch at the beginning of next year. So the journey that I'm going to take you on today is around the unresolved kind of issue of forecasting and estimating, having a look at what guidance is out there at the minute, reflecting on why it's so hard, and then hopefully giving you some really good questions and thought concepts that you can take back into your organizations and back into your project, looking at how we can proactively change for the future. So to kick things off, let's start with some kind of basic concepts. These have taken directly from the APM glossary of terms published on their website. Now, these definitions may not be perfect, and there could be quite a large debate in a separate webinar in terms of the debating of these kind of basic glossary terms. However, what is the most important thing to take away is these two practices are closely aligned. So estimating is the process of approximating project parameters such as cost, duration, resource requirement. And forecasting, on the other hand, is predicting the future project performance based on historical data, expert judgment, or mathematical models. And these processes are not just administrative tasks, they're the bedrock upon which successful projects are built on. And they guide us from project initiation through to its successful completion. Now, before we dig deeper, favorite quote of mine that I always use when we're talking about this topic is from Nassim Taleb, and this always sticks in my mind whenever I talk around estimating and forecasting. So it's understand the model's errors before you understand the model itself. So focusing on statistical modeling and methods and processes, we hope to get more accurate results by using proper approaches. And they do deliver on that promise in terms of improving accuracy to a certain extent, but they don't necessarily guarantee a successful delivery against those modeling outcomes. They still give you an approximation based on a set of parameters or a set of understandings at the current state or the future state. So it really is an age-old saying that all models are flawed and wrong, but some are useful. And I think my first prompt to you all to consider is, when's the last time that you've really acknowledged and addressed the flaws in your models and approaches publicly through leadership chain and the project teams and ongoing discussions before you just jump into using them? Because we know that there's a lot of good tools and techniques out there, but there's no kind of one silver bullet to fix all problems. So is your culture of your organization or your project set up so that talking about these flaws and these errors and the variances is a given and accepted part of life? Or is it kind of brushed under the carpet and you're only focusing on those outcomes rather than the actual process and the flaws within it and how to resolve? So just a very, very quick having just a very, very quick peek under the hood of estimating. All the techniques and tools I've kind of previously mentioned have their place, and there are many different types of estimates. Now, the exact nomenclature, depending on your organization, depending on your industry, may vary, but this is just a small extract and a bit of a sneak preview as to how we chose to represent the range of estimating techniques available in the forthcoming Project Controls in the 21st Century guidance from the APM and the ACOSTE. And this is a sign of the sign of good estimating processes is essentially that the appropriate techniques are chosen for the correct stage in the project life cycle or the availability of the detail that you have. And then these estimates essentially refine as more information becomes available through the life of the project. And you may swap your estimating technique as more information gets uncovered. And the more we progress, the more we can reduce the range of estimates that are on offer. And our goal ultimately with estimating is that we begin to narrow down to a smaller and smaller range within which we hope that if we've done our job correctly, the actual outcome will be within that narrower range. And this is within the parameters of time, cost, quality, kind of carbon capture, any parameter that you care to estimate. So it's not just around what things cost or how long things take to develop. When it comes to forecasting, again, we have an array of methods at our disposal. And historical data analysis allows us to draw insight from past project data. Expert judgment, for example, leverages the experience of professionals in the field. Parametric models can use statistical relationships to predict project parameters. And Monte Carlo simulation employs random variables to model uncertainty. And technology-driven forecasting can then leverage all of those tools like artificial intelligence and machine learning to make much more accurate, hopefully, predictions. And both the estimating and the forecasting are central tools in the toolbox for effective project controls. And as such, they should have one central objective, to provide data and information which improves and enhances effective decision-making for the project. So I'll say that again, it's to provide data and information which improves and enhances the decision-making of the project. It doesn't necessarily give you the answer, but what it should do is facilitate a conversation and facilitate some effective decision-making. Without them, the project can't navigate through that complex sea of change and retain viability. Now, what we're not going to do is do a masterclass on the different tools and techniques. I'm coming at this from a slightly different angle and zoom right the way out to talk about the wider placement of estimating and forecasting and reflect on why these techniques and models are all well and good. Single-handedly, they aren't really helping us to deliver better projects. And unfortunately, we have statistics that kind of back that up, and the statistics really don't lie. So in fact, when we're talking about how artificial intelligence will transform project management earlier this year, the Harvard Business Review quoted that every year, approximately $48 trillion is invested in projects, but only 35% are considered a success. Now, there are various different quotes that I could pull out that have different percentages, but the overarching theme is that we're not very good at delivering successful projects. Now, an entirely different webinar would be on how do you define success on a project, because obviously it's in the eye of the beholder. But the statistics alone, even if you were to argue that some of them were a success despite overrunning or maybe overspending, etc., what we see is an alarming waste of resource just globally across project delivery. Now, we can't possibly stand here and say to ourselves that we just need to do a better job of applying the pre-existing models that we have in place, embrace a little bit of emerging technology, and that's all we need to do to close the gap and drive up efficiency. I personally think that the challenge is much more multifaceted. Now, what is clear is that whatever we do, we need to strive towards more efficiency and above all, promote much more effective decision-making as a result of our estimating and our forecasting. So let's now pause and have a look at what current guidance is out there and what this can potentially tell us about the current state of our estimating and our forecasting. So as part of the preparation for this session, I polled a number of different sources, just did a basic desktop review to see what widely accessible publications are already available on the topic. And the results kind of triggered quite a thought-provoking kind of response from myself. So let's start with the government functional standards, freely available on their government portal website. So within the project delivery standard, estimating only mentioned once. And estimates are referred to only 4 times in the whole of the guidance standard. With forecasting, again, only mentioned 4 times, and the forecast as a actual kind of forecast on a project, less than 10. Having a look to the continuous improvement assessment framework, which is another one of the screen grabs that I put on the screen, the concept of estimates is barely mentioned, and when it is mentioned, it only falls within the practice area of planning. Estimating is only mentioned within project closeout, which is a bit peculiar. Forecast is a little bit better represented in this framework, but still, it's not really a universal concept that flows through all of the assessment framework. The project delivery capability framework, one of the others on the screen, competencies for project delivery professionals at every level that is set centrally by the government. You'd expect that estimates would be referenced in this, but it's only referenced once, and the process of estimating is only referenced through the lens of resource management. Again, quite peculiar. Forecasting only appears in reference to budgets, and forecasting as a named process doesn't even appear at all. Going across to the infrastructure and projects authority guidance, the only available guides at the time that I did this desktop review were 2 very cost-centric documents around guidance and requirements in the cost estimating arena. Now, having spoken to the IPA, I am under the understanding that this is currently being addressed by the IPA, and updates to some of these documents will be made publicly available shortly to close this gap in language and actually pulling through some of these concepts on estimating and forecasting, so it's more universally applied. If I go across to, say, for example, learning legacy portals that are available, the most popular and famous one is Crossrail. It shows a similar cost-biased view on estimating and on forecasting practices and procedures. And then even if I have a look around kind of ACOSTE and APM documentation, we have the estimating guide, which was an original collaboration between the APM and the ACOSTE. But again, the guidance is quite heavily cost-focused and cost-biased. And then when I have a look at the APM competence framework, there's no explicit mention of estimating or forecasting as a competence within the framework. In fact, the only place that I could find the concept of estimating and forecasting discussed at length was within the APM bot. So this got me thinking, is there actually a critical gap in our guidance that we provide our project teams and our leaders? Or is it that estimating and forecasting is so inextricably linked to everything that we do, it's covered without being mentioned outright as a named process in all of our guidance? However, you know what they say about assumptions. If you assume it's covered but never mentioned, then, and you know the rest of the saying. So this was kind of quite a high-level desktop review, and it was merely to demonstrate a point, which is my second kind of prompt for you today. When you're thinking around estimating and forecasting practices within your organization or within your project, are they implicit, as in you assume that people do them, or are they explicit, as in you explicitly write down what you are expecting to see and what you are expecting people to do across your project and your organization? And then my second prompt after that is, are they cost-centric only? Or do you see estimating and forecasting as a much more holistic approach that wraps around all sorts of different elements, such as the quality, the carbon capture, the schedule, the cost, etc. So that holistic view. So why is so with the guidance question in the back of our heads, let's further explore why estimating and forecasting is so difficult. So this is where we start to kind of throw in some of the common challenges, and we start to navigate down the path of things that most people understand pretty well, but are still unresolved issues on projects. And let's start with kind of the general expertise in terms of estimating and forecasting. And we've all been there on a project where we've got a impending deadline. We need to compile estimates for either an activity, a subsection, or a larger aspect, or aggregate estimates from across multiple different factions of the project or suppliers. And where do these estimates generally get sourced from? Now, at best, they'll come from a team of people who are skilled and experienced in estimating. They may come from an estimating department with the relevant skill set and the relevant competence to be able to do it. But these, certainly in my experience, these departments are often kind of very, very short on time. So they're very kind of time poor. At worst, they'll come from a team of people that are under pressure, aren't necessarily fully skilled in the skill set of estimating and forecasting, going back to my explicit versus implicit guidance on the documentation. And the wider appreciation of estimating and its importance and onward implications is potentially lost. And therefore, what you end up receiving as the receiver of these estimates is a mishmash. Some well documented, others not so much. And that amalgamates into something that at some point a team of people will need to stand up and defend. And that's where we start to see errors creep in and ranges that are imprecise and highly subjective. And the same set of resources are dependent on again and again to provide these estimates, and are generally in short supply and relatively time poor. Now, within projects and organizations, culture plays a huge part as well. With larger organizations and projects, it's very easy to fall into kind of factions, with the risk team operating as one unit, the cost or the finance team operating as another, planning and scheduling sitting apart potentially once again. And the communication and the collaboration across large teams begins to break down, especially with this kind of hybrid working as well. The culture of siloed working also has a stifling effect on our ability to take a holistic approach to estimating. We then have layered on top of that human nature and our ability to be entirely over optimistic. So despite the fact that we don't work collegiately together across our teams all of the time, across organizational boundaries, across organizational levels, we still firmly believe in our ability to estimate really, really well. We have faith that the processes and the process won't let us down, and the techniques and the tools won't let us down. And it's difficult for the teams to bear in mind the quote I provided to you to ponder on earlier around being aware of the model's errors before using the model itself. We as a collective team are a model. We need to understand our flaws and our kind of limitations in terms of communication, open and transparent dialogue, the ability to do good practice processes, the time available before we can actually go and really truly understand whether we're estimating accurately or not. And this can't be any more applicable to the nature of estimating within large teams. So we're terrible at accepting our flaws when our approaches falter. Therefore, estimates are inherently over-optimistic, and the real truth of how our human limitations get in the way of our ability to estimate is often lost in the noise and not actually documented in any way. The other area of kind of common challenges is around data and governance. But the advances in technology are going to fix this, right? And to an extent, yes, they will help. But don't underestimate the scale of change that some organizations and some teams need to go through to get to that end goal and to that kind of aspirational state where we have AI, we have all of the different kind of analytical tools, all talking to one another and all working with one another. The larger the project and the more organizations, teams and individuals, setups that there are, the more likely it is that we have an incomplete or an inaccurate data set. An investment at central client organizations and larger delivery and contractor organizations in technology and data cleansing is clear and is starting to come through. However, our information is only as good as our weakest link. We need to always recognize that irrelevant of whether we're in a large scale kind of organization or whether we're in kind of a smaller SME, we need to remember that the larger project is often made up of many third-party organizations And they may not all have the same level of data maturity and integrity as, say, prime contractors. And this leads to more inaccuracy creeping in and the ranges becoming more subjective and less precise. So sharing a centrally funded and accessible by all data lake with the corresponding systems is one way of resolving this. And there's work ongoing within the IPA and other organizations to try and address this and set up that central shared data lake, that central shared system. However, there's a lot of blockers in our way with contractual mechanisms, IPR issues, concerns around data sharing, and that plagued the way of essentially true and authentic collaboration for the greater good. We will still aspire to get there, but certainly the journey is not a straight one. Compounded with all of this is the rate of change and the fact that many organizations, and I would actually argue all organizations, currently left with very bloated and outdated policies and procedures that are simply too slow to react to our really quick and changing landscape, both in terms of the level of change that we're seeing through projects and the level of technological advancement that we're having to try and keep up with. We're leaving our kind of processes and our governance frameworks behind, and essentially they start becoming an anchor to kind of slow our ability to react and make those effective decisions. That's slowing us down quite substantially. High technological debt in organizations ultimately is compounded with that bloated and non-streamlined process, and that results in duplication, inefficiency, and degrades that single source of truth that our estimates are relying upon. Now, just a quote to kind of break up some of the kind of more heavier content, you'll see a few Douglas Adams quotes I've purposely put into this presentation. Now, when the ACOSTE and the APM got together to write the new guide, we've put a number of different kind of hitchhikers, Easter eggs in there, simply because a lot of these quotes are very, very relevant, and the reflection on society and our impossible requirement to estimate and forecast our future in some of these quotes is amusingly on point, and our need to forecast the future, but our inability to do so with any great accuracy will continue to be a project's team's biggest challenge. Ultimately, we can have all of the tools and techniques, but ultimately forecasting, it's just our best guess at that point in time. And for us to get comfortable with the fact that it's our best guess with our known parameters is a cultural challenge that we need to work through as teams. So I'm now going to talk to you about a framework which I quite enjoy kind of using when it comes to estimating within projects. So really, we've got to understand the trade-off between accuracy and precision. And so when I talk about accuracy, I basically mean how close the estimate is to the actual outcome that it ends up being. So how accurate is our professional guess, for want of a better term. Precision is how repeatable that process is. So obviously in an ideal world, everybody would say, well, it's obvious. I want high accuracy and high precision estimates every single time. And that's, yes, I agree, that's the ideal scenario. Is it actually doable? So your estimation team is consistently producing estimates that are very close to the actual costs. And these estimates have low variability. You can trust that the estimates are not only accurate, but also precise. So that's the ideal area. You've then got the quadrant of high accuracy and low precision. So in this scenario, in this example, the project estimate team produces a single, highly detailed estimate that's very close to the actual cost. However, they invest a significant amount of time and resource into producing this estimate. So this represents high accuracy, as in the estimate actually was very close to the true cost. But it's very low in precision in the fact that you only have one estimate and it took a very long time to produce. So the reality of repeating that process on a kind of ongoing basis is very difficult to recreate. Moving through to the low accuracy, high precision kind of bottom right of this quadrant, In this case, your team produces multiple cost estimates for the project, but they vary wildly from one another. Some estimates are much higher, some are much lower than the actual cost when you actually look back and close that feedback loop. However, the average of all of these estimates is relatively close to the true cost. So that represents the fact that you've got high precision, you've got multiple estimates, low variability, but low accuracy. So any one individual estimate is not close to the true cost. So you've got a repeatable process, but essentially a wide range that's coming out of that process. You can average that out and manage it. And then finally, the worst kind of case scenario, you're in the position where you have low accuracy and low precision estimates. And this is where your estimates are both inaccurate and imprecise, and they vary wildly, far from the actual project cost, and your team struggles to provide reliable cost projections that are repeatable as a process. So essentially what I want you to take home and kind of reflect on with this is, where is your balance in your organization, in your project? Where are you on this chart? Because balancing accuracy and precision is crucial, and it's always a very fine balancing act. Even though striving both for high accuracy and high precision is ideal, the project manager and the project team often face trade-offs. So, for example, producing a highly accurate estimate may require extensive data collection, analysis, which is time-consuming and costly. And on the other hand, relying on a range of estimates with high precision may involve trade-offs in terms of accuracy. And the project team needs to make informed decisions about the level of accuracy and precision required based on project objectives, available resources, and the risk tolerance within the organisation or the project team. And achieving the right balance, there's no one fit for every project and organisation. Finding that right balance for you and your team is essential to successful planning and execution. So my question really is for you is, do you know where your estimates lie on this chart? Are they balanced in the right way? And are you as an organization, as a team, happy with the trade-offs that you're making as that team? Going back to understanding the flaws of your model before you actually use the model itself. So although there are many other aspects that impact your ability to estimate, like external factors such as social, regulatory, geopolitical, and environmental factors, I wanted today to zoom in on one last area of challenge, which is that overemphasis on schedule. Now, you hear me talk today about the fact that estimating and forecasting doesn't just belong to the cost segment of a project. It's a holistic process, which everybody should be skilled in. However, when we get to the stage where political and economic factors kick in, there's a tendency to throw out all of that good practice. In the tendering phase, we've got 3-point estimating techniques. We've got decent processes and practices coming out of the estimating team or department or individuals that are skilled in those estimates. However, we then set singular dates and targets in our contracts, in our commitment to our customers, to our stakeholders. And we wrap this round a single budget figure, which then goes through a process of getting singular point funding. So in order for us to fully embrace the uncertainty of our estimating and of our forecasting, we need to collectively change the tide of reverting to singular point commitments in our wider activities, including our communications within the project. Embedding that culture of discussing likely outcomes in terms of a range is not just about keeping it within the estimating and forecasting process. It needs to flow in all of our discussions around budgets, around public commitments, around targets, around funding envelopes. And without that joined up, integrated view of estimating, we'll continually embed the optimism bias into our project, despite us really understanding the best practice around embracing ranges and having different confidence levels. Now, once these single points are often much narrower ranges that we feel than what we would normally feel comfortable with are set within maybe a contractual landscape or a political landscape, that's when, certainly from my experience, the fear kicks in. The fear of admitting as a collective that we were wrong on our estimates, the fear of admitting that the landscape has changed, and the fear that the consequences of being wrong may not have adequately been understood or considered by our wider stakeholder group. Which brings me on to ethics. And the most important thing that we should always retain with our estimating and our forecasting practices is impartiality. Now, I'm not going to read the quote out on the screen. This is from the APM and ACOSTE estimating guide. But impartiality is the single most important foundation from which our estimating and forecasting processes need to be built from. And impartiality and ensuring the ethical development of high integrity estimates should be the cornerstone of any process and policy. And that just doesn't start and end with the estimate's initial creation. It cuts through the life of a project or program. So another question I'd like to pose to you today is, how often do you see estimates that have been submitted that are not particularly credible or lack the appropriate confidence been challenged in terms of the impartiality and the essentially challenged by the organisation? And then more importantly, when new information comes to light, which it always does as you go through project delivery, how many of your projects then close that feedback loop and raise this as a change, go back through the estimate and update that estimate as part of standard practice? And is it met when you do try and do that? Is it met with acceptance, trust, and collaboration by the team? Or is it seen as another set of hoops to jump through? So it's not just the beginning that impartiality needs to be maintained, but throughout the life of a project, this impartiality and this loosely held forecast and estimate needs to be upheld in every team member. We need to embed that within the culture for this to be truly successful. So I've talked a lot about the barriers and the reasons why this is difficult, but what can the individuals and the organisations do to change for the better? So in the world of projects, the pursuit of accuracy and precision in estimating is paramount. We invest a lot of effort developing intricate technical processes, harnessing the power of data-driven statistical modelling. What often goes unnoticed is that bedrock upon which the processes are stood upon, which is the foundation of culture, behaviour, competence, and the supportive structures that wrap around those processes and techniques that we need to be put in place. So the good modelling frameworks and methods, statistics, robust systems, and harnessing the power of data are all credible change initiatives that I see lots of organisations harnessing the power of. However, those alone won't be enough. You can have all of the best frameworks and the best processes in place and the best data analytics and the best AI. But if you over rely on just following what the data tells you, you may miss what's directly in front of you. So don't essentially sail your boat off the waterfall just because the data tells you to do so. The human interaction for me is the most paramount to harnessing change and improving our decision making with our ability of estimating and forecasting. Data takes us so far, then we must learn from one another and collaborate. This isn't easy to do. So let's reflect on what we've heard so far. So currently, our guidance is either silent or almost silent on the topic of estimating and forecasting as a holistic practice. We have a lot of good elements in the cost estimating side of things, but not necessarily the wrapper that wraps around the process, the holistic process. And yet we all need to be able to do this and have an appreciation for it in our daily project lives. Now, there will always be experts in estimating and forecasting. That competence should be developed. That baseline competence needs to be developed across the whole team. Therefore like to make kind of the bold statement today that our current guidance isn't good enough and we need to work to improve it. And certainly we're working alongside the IPA, we're working alongside the APM to try and address some of those gaps through the ACOSTE. We'll never be able to invest in estimating and forecasting competence in our teams until this topic is seen as just as important in our guidance documentation as any other competence. Again, going back to that holistic set of skills that a project team member needs to be able to harness. And then our culture of disciplines and sub-disciplines with forming teams and therefore potentially falling into the trap of siloed working, especially the larger the project and the kind of organization gets, where you have different teams. You may have a risk team, a planning team, project management team, planners, estimators, the accounts and the finance teams, and they may technically be all under the same PMO, but they don't necessarily talk in a very organic way. This tends to drive siloed thinking, and collaboration isn't as good as it could be. Estimating needs to be a multi-method approach, and it involves the whole team. Yes, we have subject matter experts that are exceptionally good at their estimating practices, but we need to make sure that we address the alternative perspectives and interpretations from different stakeholders for that reality check to be done continuously through the project. Now, this can be done by removing the siloed work and embracing multidisciplinary teams that are collaborating daily as part of their normal working day, not just pre-programmed monthly calls or diarized meetings to kind of force collaboration. Teams need to develop a culture of professional curiosity and challenge. And this is definitely a competence that I think is overlooked quite a lot in a lot of our written standards and our written bits. How do we instill a culture of professional curiosity? Be deeply curious and inquisitive helps to embed the reality checks and enforce that multi-method, multi-perspective approach. And one of my favorite overused sayings is that the mantra on projects should always be to have strong opinions loosely held. So we know that change is inevitable. Therefore, we can have strong opinions on what we believe the forecast is at that point in time. But the minute new data comes along, we shouldn't hold on to those opinions. We should loosely hold on to them and be absolutely fine with changing our mind when the situation changes. And then all of this comes down to professional behaviours in the workplace and ensuring that we're set up for success. Now, you could argue that this list could be applied to any topic within the project delivery, which I do agree upon. However, with estimating and forecasting both been practices that are the bedrock of successful project controls, essentially these practices need to bring people together and integrate thoughts and ideas and information in a powerful way. If your estimates are poor in your organisation or your project, potentially it's an indicator that these basic tenets are lacking or need to be improved. So that ability to uphold impartiality, irrespective of the decision and irrespective of the point of the life cycle. Establishing supportive structures that don't block changing information from amending the view of the estimate or the forecast. Having contracts that support and uphold trust and are not blockers to it, especially across organisations. And finally, seeking assurance through collaboration efforts. So it's not a stale checklist on the process documents. So it's no secret that we need the whole system to work together to get decision excellent. And this is no different in estimating and forecasting. So just as a recap before I open to the Q&A, I've a few questions to you today that I'd like you to take away, and hopefully you've got some insight from the journey that I took you on today. So first of all, are your estimating and forecasting practices implicit or explicit across your project and your organisation? Are they too cost-centric or are they holistic in their approach? So estimating and forecasting are core skills. They're not just cost-orientated conversations, nor should they be implicitly assumed to be in place in our processes and ways of working. My challenge to you is make it explicit. Invest in this core skill across your teams. Know your limitations of your models and your approaches, and be brutally honest with their potential errors before you begin. This will instill better practices with open conversations, certainly more accuracy, and more process will allow you to get better at this. Do you know where your estimates lie in terms of that accuracy versus precision trade-off? Are they balanced in the right way for your organization and your project? And are you aware of the trade-offs that you're making as a team, and are you happy with them? You can have the best frameworks and the best processes in place, but if you over-rely on following the data, you may miss what's directly in front of you. Don't be that team that sails the boat off the waterfall just because the data is telling you to do so. How are you upholding impartiality through the life of your project and the estimates and forecasts within it? How can you develop that professional curiosity within your teams and establish that culture where strong opinions are loosely held? And then finally, establish that culture and process of discussing estimates and forecasts in terms of ranges rather than exact singular points as the norm. And that should go through the whole life cycle, all through the stakeholders. So educate, invest in skills and training to make this change. And as we navigate through the complex landscape of projects, let's remember that success is not solely measured by the precision of our estimates, but by the strength of our foundations. Foundation that's built on culture and excellence, the competence of our team, and the supportive structures that enable us to adapt and thrive. So thank you for listening. Before I go to Q&A, I'm just going to wrap up just in case people need to drop off this call. Just want to remind you of the dates for the diary for the ACOSTE.